Welcome to the Building Performance Podcast, where we talk about trends in high-performance building and retrofits. I am your host, as always, Corbett Lunsford. We have a video version of this right now that's going onto the YouTube channel. We are here today with Joseph Hillenmeyer.
Hello, Corbett.
Joseph is with the residential new construction side of Aprilaire, which is a ventilation company that I really admire because you guys have never said that there is one size fits all or that there's a silver bullet for this. Your approach to ventilation echoes my approach to ventilation, which is that every house is different. You need to test and figure out what the house is doing, and then kind of plug and play with these different approaches with pressurizing the house or sucking air out of the house or dampers and filters and all kinds of different things. Also, you do not deal a whole lot in reactive chemistry kind of air cleaning, which I also thank you for not jumping on the bandwagon with everybody right now. So I'm interested in your manufacturer viewpoint, because obviously, like I know, and everybody who follows this channel knows, we need ventilation in homes. And therefore, anybody who's making the tools that we can use to actually plug into these homes is very useful for us. So I want to know where you're trying to figure out where the landscape is as far as codes and standards goes. We got all kinds of, the IECC, the IRC. We've got things like Energy Star and Indoor Air Plus certification and Passive House and all these things that are kind of floating out there. What are your biggest concerns with the ventilation language in these standards and codes that we've got right now?
I think the biggest concern, you literally just hit it by naming those different levels there. And, some of those are codes, some are standard, some are prescriptive, some are things you can strive for as a differentiator. So, they're not required. Indoor Air Plus and Energy Star, not something that you have to do. Certainly don't have to do Passive House, right? Those are things that we can shoot for in the building community. But isn't that in and of itself kind of a problem? I mean, if that's the right way to make a house healthy, then why is the code that everybody has to subscribe to so far below what these stronger things are dictating? Because
isn't that the same reason that not all of us has health insurance, right? Health is like a luxury,
yeah.
not a.
I'm not going to say that it's an issue unique to the building industry, but we hear those complaints in other facets of life, and we haven't heard it that much here. That I think we have a lot of science, we have a lot of understanding, we know what the best thing to do from a fresh air standpoint in a home is, and the minimum standard to which you can build is so far below some of the abilities that are out there. Now, there are things in the way, obviously price. I mean, building a passive home is not the same price as building, a more standard production home. But I think the codes need to figure out how can we affordably and across the entire country deliver, an equal level of health to people through fresh air. And as you introduced, I think my next concern would be, is it application based enough? Because to deliver the same quality of health through ventilation in Florida is not the same way you would do it in Minnesota or New York. It's definitely not the same way you would do it in LA if you were living next to a freeway. We're not, when you're trying to improve your space by bringing in outdoor air, what the outdoor air is like is the most important factor, right? Is it loaded with humidity? Is it loaded with particulate? Again, do you live near a freeway and it has a lot of exhaust on it? Is it springtime and you have a lot of pollen in the air and you live in, I spent some
Atlanta.
time. Yeah. I spent some time in Kentucky. I live in Wisconsin now. People might say, why would you move north? Because through April through May, I was miserable in that state, So if I live there now, I would certainly be doing everything in my power to keep that stuff out of my house in the spring and summer. So let me know if I can expand on it, but I really think that, I think the biggest issue with the codes is they're probably not strong enough. They're not consistent enough, and they're not application based.
And so just to hit on codes, I want to ask you about the above code standards in a second, but Matt Reisinger points out that you can go into a neighborhood that's being built today and see homes that have the same technology that was available 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've got all these things now that you make, for instance, ventilation devices and dehumidifiers, all this stuff that it's different. You can have, you wouldn't buy a car that's got 40-year-old technology in it. That would be crazy. So there's the code thing that and by the way, for anybody who's watching or listening, just because it's in a code doesn't mean that that's what you're going to get. And you need to fight for your your rights for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of code officials aren't enforcing this stuff because they don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you guys are helping to kind of try and bring those people up to speed too. But so as far as above code programs like Indoor Air Plus, let's just pick that one because that's the one that's explicitly supposed to be about air quality,
Yeah.
health. What what are you concerned with about that? They're going through a revision for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
Right, for that.
The draft has come out. I certainly think it's very positive. It gets to MERV 13 filtration, which I think the science is, I think, pretty indisputable, but that's really the level you need to be at if you want to be concerned about human health. If you're going to make a commitment to get PM 2.5, those most damaging particulate, if you're going to, make an attempt to grab viruses. So that's a step in the right direction. Their draft version pushes pretty hard for balanced ventilation or a balanced solution. I believe within 10 CFM of how much you're bringing in versus sending out. I don't know if that will actually come to pass or not. Again, they're still in the draft portion of it, but that might be another case where we need to look at, is that going to make a situation where you're not doing a whole lot for health, but you're adding a lot of cost to your ventilation, what you need to do to properly ventilate. So again, I don't want to go against what I just said earlier. We need to do the right thing for everybody, but to do the right thing for everybody, we need a solution that fits for everybody. And the other issue with it would be is I think that, again, it's, it's you still kind of have the ability to check a box maybe without taking enough consideration into the application. So, maybe there should be more mention of humidity in the ventilation part of things like Indoor Air Plus and Energy Star, so that if you're in a humid climate, you automatically need to consider that when you're choosing your ventilation solution.
They do not have some kind of a dehumidification requirement?
They do. It's separate from ventilation. So I think my point is there, is when you're explaining ventilation, it would probably just be helpful to explain that, yes, the CFM and whether it's balanced is important, but also, as you mentioned earlier, what else have you tested about the house to figure out if it's is it the correct solution for that house? So I think it gets real hard with some of these to just say, you need supply ventilation. Well, I mean, maybe that's what you need. Maybe it's not, so.
And does it need to be dehumidified? Like you mentioned, Florida, if you're going to have supply ventilation, you better dehumidify that so that one box that brings in air that then dehumidifies it and then distributes it in the house is like, that's a necessary piece of equipment. Exactly. By the way, so as far as the testing goes, like the idea that they would require a balanced, by the way, for those of you who are listening, the audio only version of this podcast, I'm making quotes in the air because in order to find out if you've got within 10 CFM on the supply and the exhaust sides, which you can do, but you would need to test. And I know how many copies of my book I've sold, and Testo and all the companies that make, anemometers know how many actual tools are in technicians' hands out there. I highly doubt that we've got enough people who are trained in testing and enough pieces of test equipment to actually test. And when do you test, right? Because I think that one of the things I'd like to have you express, I use ERVs. I've got an ERV installed on this tiny house and I've got an ERV on the big house, but that's because they're very special kinds of houses. The main problem with ERVs is that when you first install them, the performance that day is going to be different potentially than 6 months or a year down the road.
Yeah. And let's take that and think about the people that are involved in putting these products in. You have a subcontractor. It's generally going to be your HVAC guy who's installing these ventilation products, correct? When they're going into the new home, his primary interest when he's there is going to be, the HVAC and the furnace, the AC, whatever system you're using there. When you bring in these other components, if you've all of a sudden got a ventilation solution that now takes as long to set up and balance and all of that as some of this other core equipment, is he going to have enough technicians trained to do that? Are they going to spend the time to do it right? And this isn't throwing anybody under the bus here. It's just, the reality of it is that the more complicated of a system you need to set up, the less likely that it's going to be done correctly. And then after he sets it up, is the person testing it, do they have enough knowledge and understanding to know if it's set up correctly? Is the fail safe that comes in actually a fail safe, or is it just somebody else checking a box saying, oh, they got an ERV up there, house is good to go? That ERV could be, having a negative impact if it was set up incorrectly. So,
And the last part of this, which is the most important part, is the person who lives there going to actually clean the filters and the core, which if it
Yeah.
doesn't get done, then like it's balanced on the first day, but then it slowly becomes out of balance. I just pulled my core. I'm like editing my ERV video right now
Yeah.
and pulled it out. And there was a load, like a pile this big of dried mosquitoes in my system. And you know,
Yeah.
I'm down there. I know that that's supposed to happen. But if you've got a little bit simpler system that's more accessible by normal people, they
Yeah.
might be more likely to change it. Or if that fails, like if an ERV fails, there's no fresh air in my house
Yep.
because it's so airtight. So now we're in big trouble. And so in a normal house where you've got reasonable air tightness, I think that's using considering options outside of a balanced recovery ventilation
Hmm.
piece of equipment is really important because of all those things. So the idea that you balance a supply only and then an exhaust fan, and then like later it's going to be the same as it was the first day. Houses are dynamic. That seems weird to me. So until we have like monitoring. Oh, and let me ask you about that. Are you guys planning on putting in sensors in your pieces of equipment to monitor their performance over
Yeah, and you know, if you look, that's on every manufacturer's roadmap, and it's definitely the next step that's going to add some autonomy to this. One way it's important, I think, is what you just mentioned when you talk about filters and stuff like that. Can we let people know that more of their equipment needs maintenance? Um, yeah, that sounds like a negative. You don't always want to make someone know that they need to that they got to go down in their basement and do something. But if they're not doing it, it's not performing correctly. And I would wonder, when we put an air cleaner cabinet in, we know how many filters we sell, and we're pretty confident that those filters get changed at the correct interval because HVAC contractors are familiar with it. Most homeowners, to some extent, know that that filter needs to be changed. If they have a 1-inch filter, they don't understand how often it needs to be changed.
Sure.
But they do know it needs to be changed. I would wonder, from an ERV manufacturer, do you sell anywhere near as many cores annually as ERVs that are going out? Is anybody actually replacing those if they get damaged? Are they cleaning them? And when they do get damaged, say you still need that fresh air, what does the person do? Maybe they just take the core out or something. I don't know, but you could get, then you've got people coming in and trying to rig it up so that it still works in some way, and it's even more out of balance. So I think if we had some sensors, that could let you know what that air quality is and point the consumer in a direction of maybe where to go, that would help a lot too. Maybe you just got something in front of your intake that's bogging the system down in some way. So again, it's on our radar. I think the big discussion for the industry is probably what do we measure and what are the levels that are too high and too low. In humidity, we've got that great ash rate chart. And I like to say, we do have sensors. The whole industry's had sensors for years, right? We've measured temperature and humidity for a long time.
What a thermostat is.
Yeah, it's an IAQ sensor. But we know the range that we want those things to be in. And with VOCs, it might be different for different VOCs and what level of, parts per million of one thing is dangerous and not of another. When does it hit that point where you should start exhausting and possibly be challenging some of your energy goals or something like that? So I think that's what we really got to get a handle on. I know there's a lot of, can you just read CO2 in a room and make a decision based on that? I think you can make a lot of decisions based on that. Certainly how many people are in the room and maybe what this, it gives us a good idea of the standard of air quality. But there might be another VOC in there that has nothing to do with when the person's in the room. Maybe you have some kind of formaldehyde that's constantly off gassing in a new home. So I think it's definitely going to be the neatest thing happening in IAQ in the next 10 years, maybe 5. I think we'll nail it down as an industry probably pretty soon. I hope.
Can I give you my wish list real quick?
Yeah.
You're like almost there. So Aprilaire has this thermostat controller that looks like a thermostat. And as somebody who just built a house who's got like 1, 2, 3 different things on my wall that are all like in this little control center. I've got my control bridge.
We call it wall acne. You got too much.
Yeah, right.
Controls on the wall.
So if you could have one thing, and yours does temperature, and it can control the heating and cooling equipment, right?
Yep.
It monitors relative humidity, and it can control your dehumidifiers. Mm-hmm. It can also control a humidifier, right?
Yep.
And I'm finding that the humidity. So for anybody who does not know this, even an ERV, an HRV would be way more this way than an ERV is. But even the ERV alone is the main humidity load in my new house that I just built. So when it's summertime, all the humidity that's being added to the house is coming from outside, and I need to dry that out. But in the wintertime, the dryness outside dries the heck out of my house all night long. And we ended up
you're bringing that air in just like you're bringing in the humid air.
That's right. And we were skating 30% relative humidity. It was like 29 several times. And I was like, I'm changing my tune about humidifiers. I think that humidifiers are not a band-aid for houses that are really leaky in the wintertime. Once you get down to a certain air tightness and you get down to like almost all your air being introduced through mechanical ventilation, I feel like humidifiers become more important again down at our level. And so anyway, to get back to the original point,
that is a really interesting statement though, because I don't think the industry agrees. I mean, humidifiers have, there's concern about them or a belief that maybe you don't need them in an ultra tight house. And I disagree with that. And maybe in the first year, there's enough moisture in the house from new building materials, but I would challenge that. And I would certainly say 2 or 3 years down the road, there's no way you're not going to
100%. If we were in any place more north than Atlanta, I would absolutely be on the phone with you about getting a humidifier. I already have a dehumidifier, but let's get back to the controller, right? So you've got temperature, you got humidity, you can control all those pieces of equipment. I don't have to interact with them, right? You also have now the air quality monitoring, which you were mentioning, which can control ventilation. I feel like the only thing that's missing from your controller at this point is pressure balancing, where it could open up dampers and relieve pressure imbalances in the house. So if I turn on the kitchen exhaust, I have a separate system that has its own monitoring system, and that monitoring system is not perfect. I'm in the middle of like trying to tune that so that it does something slightly different than what the manufacturer made it to do. But I would love it if I just didn't have to set up any of that stuff, and I just had this master brain that was kind of the house equalizer and equalized the heat flow, equalized the airflows, equalized the pressures, and equalized the moisture and air quality in the house. And so that I've got like a brain that's always taking care of stuff, and I don't have to log into my app to see what my air quality or any of that stuff is. It's like, it's all just taken care of.
Yeah. It's, I like that because, when we do talk about the attributes of IAQ, we talk a lot about how they influence each other. And while it is all in one place, you're still manipulating them individually. And, if they had an ability to understand how one trait was going to impact another and use that in an advantageous way, that would be kind of the ultimate autonomy of an indoor air quality system, right? Being able to use all of the functions of your house, all of the fans in your house to keep that air quality positive.
Right. Yeah. If it could be like a symphony and there's a conductor that's in charge of all of them, that would be really beautiful. And I'm not talking about the Internet of Things, just so everybody's clear. I'm not talking about smart devices that connect to the internet. So I don't care about that as long as this brain can communicate with them locally. By the way, also, I just to clarify, I think that the thing that you guys do right that I have been, people have tried to sell me on the other side of things, which is that we, instead of having a control and all these different devices, we have one box that can control the air quality, the humidity, the temperature, all that stuff. I feel like that's not what I'm talking about, because one machine that controls for all of that is like, I don't trust that.
The answer is not a single mechanical product. The answer, as you say, is a control that ties all those mechanical products together. You're never going to be able to package everything you need. And again, I mean, back to our original point, from an application standpoint, how are you ever going to get one box that manages every single attribute and works in every home? It's just not, it's not possible. The home is a system of things that work together to improve indoor air quality. And if we had a control that made all those things work together, that would definitely be the, I think the ultimate solution there.
Yeah. So are you concerned that following code or following these standards might mean that your products will not perform properly? Like, I know, having built a house, that also including in my contract that the installer will read the manufacturer's instructions. Like, aside from what code requires, you got to read the instructions, which almost nobody actually does. Like, let's be honest. How does that impact how your products are going to perform?
I will say, from an install standpoint, we do have an excellent relationship with all of our contractors who install products. We've made sure to stay involved with organizations like ResNet so that we have a line of communication with the people that go in and ultimately test those products. And I think that's, I guess, I'm not sure that the codes themselves probably provide enough maybe explanation to get the products in there correctly, but I hope these other organizations and the fact that our dealer base, I believe, is very interested in doing it correctly, goes a long way to making sure that our products do operate. I don't think any of the codes would have our products operating in a way that was, not adequate. I think it really comes down to, is the install being done correctly? I think I would say a lot of our products probably perform better than code when installed correctly anyway.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Of course.
So
because they're not referenced in code.
Yeah. I mean, code is kind of the minimum anyway. I wouldn't say that. I don't think we've ever strived to build a product that just gets you to code. I mean, we build a product that gets you healthy air. So that allows you some room there. I believe that, even if maybe the installer or somebody else doesn't get it 100% right, you've got some insurance there. I mean, we have a new product, a ventilating dehumidifier, that it's got 165 CFM on the airflow side. And that was intentional in that, if you've got a lot, when you're over delivering on airflow, you've got more room there for maybe some design, parts of the system design that weren't perfect and maybe bogged down some of that CFM. You've taken that out of the equation by ensuring that you've got enough CFM. Code would not require that you need 165, but we're bringing it in again as that insurance that you're getting the proper amount of fresh air, because it's not, does your solution meet that exact number that a code is asking for? Does it deliver healthy air if you're making a product that truly has that in mind.
Sure.
I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
no, sure. So do you feel like the people who are writing codes, and let's just be perfectly honest, there are individual people who happen to probably come from one kind of class of people, and might be one race of people, might be one gender of people. They are writing these things that we have to follow. And then the standards, the above code standards, do you feel like they're aiming us in the right direction? Is there anything that you would recommend that they learn more about, aside from, we talked about filtration and dehumidification?
Yeah. So I certainly know every single one of them is probably smarter than me.
Okay. That's a nice thing to say.
But, there are some things I do agree with you where maybe, probably the people writing those codes, they probably do have a very specific home style in mind, right? Or a very, as you say, maybe a very specific group of people that are living in a very specific home in a very specific area, probably that, 2,500 square foot single family home in a nice suburb. That does not take into account people that live in an area that has much worse indoor air quality. Again, you're living by that freeway in LA or something like that. Yeah, in a multifamily situation. So I think that's something they need to be more aware of, and how does dehumidification and humidification play a role in this? I think, the idea that we'll just solve every indoor air quality problem with ventilation is not accurate, but that's really the only thing we have that's driven by code. And with the exception of Title 24, I think that's a good example of where you do have in California requirements for filtration, requirements that filter be accessible by the homeowner, not up in an attic where they're never going to go somewhere where they can get there and change it. I do think that code was written insightfully as far as how the person living in the house is going to interact with IAQ. But, the other side of that coin hasn't been something that builders and contractors have necessarily loved, because it's complicated some of their processes. So I think there's going to be, between the manufacturers, the code groups, the installers, and the home builders, there'll be some pain points for everybody, I think, ultimately, to get this right. But I think I agree that it starts with those codes addressing all attributes of the air in the home, not just fresh air. Is there some type of filtration in there? Is there something to control both excess humidity and dry air? Something to ensure that, there's not going to be mold built up in the summer. When you go back through some of the, most dangerous things that can happen in a house, mold and some of those things have been at the top of the level, top of the chart for some people, particularly if you have asthma or some other, COPD, a breathing condition. Just a little bit of mold might do nothing to some people, and it might make other people's lives unbearable. And I think you have to build and supply products that assume that anyone in that house would be comfortable.
That is an awesome way to cap this conversation. I mean, I think that the mistake I keep seeing from people in my industry is that we test the house and we try to address the house, when really the only important thing in all of this is the people who live in the house. Like the house itself, you're right, can be different for different people. It's like we really need to be paying attention to people, and that's something that's not built into code or the standards.
Yeah, well, and I think where that also hits a lot with ventilation and humidification is if you're trying to make, if you believe that the person living in the home is going to do enough in the wintertime to raise the humidity, you don't have any insurance of that. Maybe one guy cooks spaghetti every single night, twice a day, and maybe somebody else gets takeout every night. You got one guy who's boiling, 10 or 12 quarts of water, and somebody else who's bringing no water into the home. There's no way to make an assumption that the person living in the home will bring it up to the level that it needs to be at. That's what the mechanicals need to do.
Cool. Joseph, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Corbett.
Joseph is the residential new construction expert over at Aprilaire. You can find out more about them at aprilaire.com. Please do make sure that you comment below if you have things to say, if you're watching this on the YouTube channel. Subscribe. Tune in next time.